Hello everyone, and thank you for coming to this new GMI webinar. And let's wait another few, say 1 minute, 2 maximum, and allow people connecting. And today there is Will with us, which is an expert for cybersecurity, and myself, Andras Prower. So let's wait another few seconds, and then we start with this new GMI webinar. Just a few information for this webinar. You can't say, of course, you cannot talk, but you can send questions through the Q&A button you see on the bar, and we try to answer during this webinar if it's possible. Otherwise, we will answer later on. And don't hesitate to make your question. Of course, most of them probably will be, and also the ones that you wrote to you during your registration will be probably answered during this webinar. So don't be angry about that. We'll try to do, let's say, our webinar in a regular manner. And say maybe we exceed the 60 minutes, maybe it will be 70, 75. Hope you will wait until the end. Now we can start, Will.
Okay.
Okay, let us introduce ourselves. There is today Will Horner with us. So he's an engineer, with degree engineer, and he has more than 23 year experience in working different process automation companies. So we work industrial control system security since 2003, and now is a very important expert in cybersecurity, and is an accredited trainer for the cybersecurity program of TÜV Rheinland. So it's a very good expert in this matter. Myself, Andras Prower, Global Account Manager for GM International. I have 20 experience in automation and the process application. And I've started my experience in Europe, and now I'm responsible for major account worldwide. I'm also functional safety engineer, not expert in cybersecurity, but in functional safety. Okay, next slide, William. So let us introduce a little bit our company. And next again. So GM International is expert in the manufacture of intrinsically safe and seal-certified devices for main automation packages such as DCS, ESD, fire and gas, HIPS, for market like oil and gas, chemical, petrochemical, mining, food. We have more than 40 experience. The company was founded in 1993, but the our former company was Aircon Instrument, is a well-known name in the market. We produce completely in our facility in Milan, but we have also a global presence in all 5 continents. So next, this is a little bit about our organization. So we have 10 offices in the world. We have Houston, we have France, we have Russia, Middle East, India, Japan, and Singapore, and China. So we have also representative offices. We are about 200 people, and of course we organize functional safety engineer, EX, and cybersecurity courses with our experts. Okay, next. About our production, we say that we have very complete state-of-art technology, complete traceability for incoming outgoing products, complete testing for all products, and very automatized manufacturing process. We also provide a 5 years warranty for all products, and then also 10 years guarantee availability. Means that when the product is in the phase off, it will be guaranteed for another 10 years as a product for replacement. Next, about the certification, we have a product that is certified for all markets through different 15 independent agencies, and we have certification for Europe, for America, for Russia, for India, and also maritime certification. We do have also certification CL3, SC Systematic Capability 3, because nowadays the products are not anymore valid. The CL3 certification is not more valid if it's not supported by the systematic capability. It means that the design also for the product is certified. Next, this is the product range. We produce intrinsic safety barriers, safety relays, isolator with the seal certification, seal power supplies, also is pretty new in the market as a concept, but it's very important. Multiplexer for zone 1 application, termination board for connection with the main PLC and DCS in the market, hard multiplexer, surge protection, indicators, and as we said, different courses, and all of them now are organized online. So you don't need to move to travel, but we can have either the course and the exam online. Okay, next, and this is the name of our customers, most names, so divided by system vendors, EPC, OEMs, and users. We have a very long experience in the project and through different markets and customers, as you can see. Okay, thank you. I don't want to wait anymore, and now we'll leave Will explain what is the topic of today. Thank you, Will.
Okay, thank you very much. So the subject says no safety without security, no security without safety. So we're going to have a look today at some of the links between cybersecurity and safety, which is certainly a common subject that is asked, and judging by some of the questions that have been sent through in advance, hopefully this will sort of very much line up with some of the items that are being, questions that are on the tip of everyone's tongues. So just to start off with, let's start with the functional safety. And I imagine most people on this webinar will be already familiar with 61511 and its life cycle, certainly a core of a lot of the training. So, and the key part at the top of here is the hazard and risk assessment, the clause 8. The cybersecurity risk is, as it suggests, a risk, and therefore we need some form of risk assessment. But it goes a little bit further than that with the 61511, the edition 2, which has a mandatory requirement in it, which says security risk assessment, the SRA, security risk assessment, shall be carried out to identify the security vulnerabilities of the safety instrumented system. And this is really important because what they are basically saying is we're not going to mandate what the security requirements of the safety system are, but we are going to mandate that you have a security risk assessment and you join it together and handle the risks that are identified. There's a couple of extra items here that people might, bits of guidance. You got the ISA TR84, cybersecurity related to the functional safety lifecycle document there. It was released in 2017. We've got the IEC61511, which is the standards that particularly the IT departments will be a lot more familiar with, but still actually quite relevant when we get under the surface of them. And then we've got the IEC62443, used to be called ISA 99, and it's being released in various parts. And this is the parts that people tend to recognize being more associated with the security of the industrial control systems, but certainly consistent with those other standards as well. So let's just move on and have just a quick look at that. This is the 62443. As you can see, it's essentially laid out in 4 groupings. There's a general part, procedures and policies, or policies and procedures, get the words the right way around, system and component. And for the purposes of this presentation today, the webinar, on the system line there, the orange line you'll see the middle document 6244332, which is Security Risk Assessment and System Design. And in a minute, we're going to see the direct link between that and the 61511. So let's take a step back, because we're talking about risk. Now, I'm going to assume, I think it's hopefully a safe assumption, that most attendees on this webinar are going to be very familiar, probably a lot more familiar than I am, with the risk in safety. And we're just going to have a look at that and compare what that difference is in terms of risk with security. So the safety definition, let's start off with that. Risk is a measure of human injury, environmental damage, or economic loss in terms of both the incident likelihood and the magnitude of the loss or injury. Very much a reliability type focus on safety, a consequence of things breaking, damaging, or failing. As opposed to security, and here we start to see quite a significant change. And I've highlighted a couple of words here which really highlight the difference. Risk is an expression that the likelihood that a defined threat is an important word, will exploit a specific vulnerability, which is another important word, of the target industrial control system or safety system, or combination of targets causing a consequence and related impact. So a threat, therefore, being any person, indication, circumstance, or event with the potential to cause the loss of or damage to an asset. I think the key thing here is to recognize that the threat has got a malicious intent. It has a motivation to want to cause damage. Okay, whether that damage is the damage that they actually do achieve or not is another matter, but there is a malicious intent. And the other side then is the vulnerability. This is perhaps a little bit more visible to people, is any weakness that can be exploited by an adversary to gain access to an asset. So here we are really starting now to see the fundamental difference in risk. We're still talking about risk, but we're seeing a fundamental difference from the safety, traditional safety view of risk and the reliability of that, versus a malicious intent wanting to cause damage to our system, but on the other hand, still generating risk, which bottom line is, as 61511 says, still risk, and it needs to be identified. So let's just go and have a look at these words, threat and vulnerability. So we've said that we're looking for a likelihood that a defined threat, and again, we've underlined that word, will exploit a specific vulnerability. And so what we have is this sort of, let's take a view as shown in this diagram here. We have a threat source, somewhere where the threat is coming from. That could be a remote person, disgruntled employee, a hacker, various different sources. Or it could be a nation state, we're now learning as well, organized crime. And they try and target a system. That could be your SIS system or your safety instrumented functions. And they're looking for a vulnerability. And that vulnerability could be there either known to be there because it's by design. We like to keep things very simple on our safety systems. And therefore, by design, it's perhaps not, fairly weak as software goes. It's very safe in terms of reliability, incredibly reliable software. But if somebody wanted to use it for its purpose it's not intended, well, it'd probably actually be quite easy. Still a known vulnerability. Versus an unknown vulnerability, which is a bit like the undetected failures. Vulnerabilities that are present in your system, but just haven't been found yet and haven't been recognized. And it's really important, particularly for our control systems, to recognize these two types of vulnerability. We'll see that in the next slides. The other important concept I'll just introduce here now, because this then starts to shape our thinking, is the concept called a threat vector. And this is the mechanism through which the threat source exploits the target system via the exposed vulnerability. So that's giving us that sense of direction, how it's taking place. Common vectors that people know about, people talk about your USB pens, that would be a threat vector, people coming along and plugging the USB pen in, hand bring the malware with them. Remote access to SCADA systems, that's a very common, well-known threat vector, but there are many more. And certainly when you come onto the training courses, we'll be sort of expanding that out, how it actually looks and how it works. Let's just have a look at these now in terms of what we really want to understand with the safety system. Two ways that we can treat a security risk. Okay, and this is in a way the same as safety risk, reliability risk, in that we need to mitigate it somehow. We can design it out, we can remove it, and using the same sort of mechanism we've just shown you on the previous slide. There's basically two things we can do. The first one is we can remove the vulnerability at source. This is the classic one you hear with IT. We need to patch your system. What are they doing? They are removing a known vulnerability in the software at source by installing new software, otherwise known as a patch. And that modifies your system and removes that vulnerability. However, one, we have to modify the system. That might not be acceptable for your safety system, or at least it might be incredibly hard or time consuming. May not have the operational window to perform it in. You might have to wait a couple of years before you can provide the patch. And the other thing is, well, yes, we're putting a patch on the system. That's not going to give you any guarantee that you haven't got any other undetected vulnerabilities. It's only going to patch the systems that are things that are known about, and that can be fixed with a software patch. You may still have vulnerabilities in your system after taking all of that effort. And that's really actually quite important and quite hard for people to qualify in terms of what they're doing. The other side we can do is put a barrier in front of the vulnerability so that the threat can no longer get to the system. In other words, we're blocking the threat vector. We're preventing the threat from being able to manipulate the vulnerability. Classic things there, firewalls, for example, they're barriers. This is what we're talking about here. Or simply a policy, banning or blocking the use of USB media. That would be the another example of a barrier. We're talking barriers in terms of cybersecurity barriers here, not talking barriers in terms of your functional safety barriers, just to make sure we don't get confused on the terminology here. So the threat source, you may find another way getting in. These guys, if they want to target you, they're going to target you. They will find another route. And that's where you hear the terms like defense in depth coming through, to making sure you've got as many of these different threat vectors, mechanisms covered to make the hacker's life as hard as possible in terms of getting into your system. Okay. The other problem, though, is here, though, once you put some sort of barrier in place, it might deteriorate in effectiveness. And cybersecurity is like many other things, when it's policy driven and people in terms of procedures and so forth, things deteriorate over time. Things get modified, people change, experience changes. And it's really important to make sure that our system has also the maintenance sides of the life cycle thought about, as well as the original projects. There's no such thing, really honestly, no such thing as a silver bullet that just stops cybersecurity. This is going to be a long-term project. So the other side, and this is where security works in a very similar way to the concepts we know in functional safety, and that's our common modes. So the first problem is multiple systems may be vulnerable to the same threat. And the biggest example there is the Windows operating system. Why do we have all these problems? Well, all of the HMIs are on Windows. They're all vulnerable to the same problem. They all go down at the same time from the same threat. That's what we see on things like the ransomware attacks, like the pipeline, Colonial pipeline a couple of weeks ago, just happened to be compatible with the ransomware, and that was that. The other thing that we can also see is that if you've got multiple identical barriers, so for example, firewalls. There's a lot of people who like to put firewall after firewall after firewall, thinking they're giving extra protection. But the problem is, if the threat can cross the first firewall, and often they can, then they can also cross the second firewall and the third firewall and the fourth firewall if you've implemented them in the same way. It's no different in the cybersecurity. So if we're putting our layers, the onion model, we need to make sure the layers are different in order to be able to get multiple layers of protection. Now then, one of the common questions I get from particularly the functional safety people, and it's a very good question, is what's the link between SIL and the IEC62443 security level? What's the link? And my often answer is, after a little bit of training, quite the opposite to what you think it might be. Okay, security level is defined, and we've got the table here of the various different levels. But the key thing is that the threat vectors that we were discussing on the previous slides depend on the motivation, it's a key word here, and the level of sophistication of the threat source. For example, a nation state may have very high motivation and incredible levels of sophistication and budget at their disposal. So the greater the motivation and the sophistication, the greater the likelihood of a successful cyber attack, is the very simple thing to look at. And so therefore, as IEC62443 tries to define, the greater the level of effort will be required in the cybersecurity protection. So far, sounds very similar to SIL. And what we've got 4 different security levels, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's also 0, which basically means nothing, but we won't go there because it's not actually defined. So we've got everything from the protection against casual or coincidental violation. And if you go back to the Colonial Pipeline example, according to the hackers, they didn't intend to attack that pipeline, so I've read, and therefore the SL1 would have been sufficient to block that attack, which is a pause for thought moment there. So that's protection against casual or coincidental violation. It just happened to be compatible with the ransomware. Versus at the other end of the scale, protection against intentional violation of sophisticated means and extended resources, nation state type of things. You know, some of the classics that you've heard, like Stuxnet, would be very much down at that level. You know, they were going in and they were going to make that work. Okay, and very high skill levels, incredibly sophisticated means, and it worked. So I'll just stay here for a second. There is a problem though, okay? And the problem here is that if you notice the language that's going on here against those security levels, you'll also notice that there's increasing complexity entering the system in terms of providing those extra layers of protection. So unlike SIL, where the levels go up and increased reliability usually is in terms of simplification and robustness, here we're getting higher and higher levels of sophistication and therefore more and more complexity in order to provide the additional security protection. And in that respect, the security level is actually working in the opposite way to SIL, in that really many safety systems won't be able to provide SL3, SL4 type protection simply because of the complexity of the controls that would otherwise be required. And we'll see in a minute then what you might do about that instead. So it really is not a simple case of we've got SL3, therefore we should have SL4. No, sorry guys, probably actually quite the opposite. So let's just take a step back. A lot of people are very familiar with the differing security requirements between IT and OT. It's very common, and I'm talking to people, you know, they can highlight very quickly the difficulties and troubles they have working between the industrial control system and the IT security, not recognizing IT, don't recognize the system, don't understand how it works. We hear all these stories. And IT-OT convergence seems to be a holy grail. It seems to be a difficult subject. people are still looking for the solution for that. How on earth do you get this IT/OT convergent? And the key thing here is recognizing the differences, actually recognizing the differences and working to those differences rather than trying to unify. So we need to respect that there are different core competencies between IT and the industrial control system. And in order to be effective, we need to actually get a good interface between IT and OT, and that is the key to the convergence. It's not about making one match the other. It's about being able to get a nice, clean transition from one set of requirements to the other set of requirements without creating conflicts in the middle. And that's how we need to solve, and that's how we do it. So making sure policies cannot conflict with each other. The key trick to that is actually in the DMZ. Subject for another day. So cyber risk is viewed as hopefully you've seen by now, it's viewed as a safety concern. If somebody has that malicious intent, the desire to cause the end consequence, then unfortunately, they've probably got some fairly sophisticated means at their proposal. It's going to happen. It is risk. Therefore, cyber risk is safety risk as well. Now we've seen earlier, the 61511 recognizes that problem and then mandates the security risk assessment. What we've also got is a link in the TRA 84 for something called a cybersecurity PHA. And the PHA is an important step in the cybersecurity risk assessment. Okay, in terms of identifying our worst case health and safety incidents and linking that to the consequences for the cyber events. The other key part of what we need to do is also recognize the sort of type of hazard scenarios where the initiating event and control barriers are hackable. Again, we're talking about cybersecurity mitigation barriers, or some people call them controls. I'll give a quick, simple example we saw on Andre's slide at the start. Things like HART protocol being mentioned. So, for example, if someone were able to use the HART protocol to reprogram the calibration settings in your instrumentation or your control actors, then you might very well end up with a security event as a result of that. And that's what we mean in terms of having things that are hackable. Now, how can I modify otherwise seemingly simple items in order for them to behave differently to how they were designed? So that's when we come through to these concept of zones and conduits. And this really is, for me, central to dealing with the cyber risk. What we do is essentially try to break the system down into different zones and conduits, where each zone or conduit, and as underlined here, share the same security requirements. And there's we've got some examples there: industrial control systems, SIS, temporary connected systems, corporate systems, mobile devices, all sorts of different devices there that might have differing security requirements to other devices. I think the most obvious one for purposes of this webinar is the control system, the PLCs, and the SIS, the safety instrumented system. They are by definition different security requirements because one is the final layer of protection against the actions taking place in the other. We need a layer of independence there, and that should be coming through into the cybersecurity response too, by definition. And in fact, that's one of the few that is written into the 62443 as something you've got to take direct attention to. I would say just personal advice, I would say 70–80% of the time when I'm coming in to troubleshoot risk assessments and issues, I would say the zoning is probably core to fixing those risk assessment and policy issues. It's also core central to being able to get that IT/OT convergence working that we talked about in the previous slide. It's solved through zones and conduits. So let's have an example here, right? And I'll just warn you in advance that when we get to the end of this example, I'm going to put a poll up on the screen and we're going to ask some difficult questions for you to have a go at. So let's see how you take on this example. So the example here, we're going to use zones and conduits to define the control exposure to vulnerabilities. So in this example, we're going to say the antivirus, we all know, I'm assuming you're familiar with antivirus. We've got the agents of the antivirus installed in the control center, in the BPCS zone and the SIS zone. But the key thing is that the antivirus agent can modify critical system configurations and switch off and disable essential functions. Example, your antivirus agent, the software you install for antivirus, is capable of blocking all USB devices. Now that sounds really good. Oh, I can block my USB pens. However, if I then go and type the wrong bit of configuration in, it also blocks your mouse and your keyboards on the HMIs. And I've seen a site do that by accident. So they think excellent, fantastic tool. We can block all USB devices. And the next thing is the plant's going down and they can't control anything. So we've got a required antivirus barrier that we talked about earlier. So we're going to use the zone definitions to restrict the scope and the placement of the antivirus management server. Because if I can get onto the management server, I can tell the management server to tell all the devices to block USB. So me, Will Horner, as I say, I'm a hacker. I'm not probably trying to get onto your control system. I'll try and get onto your antivirus server because from there I can switch off your control system, unfortunately. So placing the antivirus server in the DMZ or into the enterprise zones, that's up out into the IT, would facilitate the hacker to bypass the barriers. Remember earlier we showed the barriers and we showed them the line going through and say, oh, I've managed to bypass the firewall and connect directly. Here's an example of how I can do it. If I put the antivirus server outside the firewall, then the allowed traffic in the antivirus will come through the firewall. The firewall will say that's recognized allowed traffic and will allow the antivirus server with the hacker to make this change. And therefore, we have broken down and broken via the controls. This is the mindset of the hackers. This is what we mean by malicious and sophistication. This is how these guys think. So we come to the poll. Let's put a poll up on our screen. So let me just describe this poll quickly for you. Where would be the most appropriate location to implement the antivirus management server? Now then, to be upfront, I have seen the antivirus server installed in all three of these different options. It's very common. Okay, each of these answers is common. There may be no right or wrong answer. So the first question answer is, are people putting it in the enterprise zone? And this is, people put it there because it's the efficient use of the IT cybersecurity resources and the IT experts can manage your antivirus for you. Very valid reason. I've seen people do it for that reason. In the DMZ, our option number 2, this is a common network that can communicate to all control systems, and therefore it's really good because you can then use it as a site-wide system with only one server. I've seen that done many times. Or do you need to install it down on the control system itself? Bearing in mind that the antivirus then is far away from the IT, far away from the experts, but it is being at the same level as the systems that it is protecting. So have a go and just think your opinion or maybe how you think it should be done. And when we are ready, we will take a look at the results.
See that people are still answering, so we wait another few seconds, then we'll stop it.
Yes, sure. That's perfect.
Okay, let's stop in a few seconds. Okay, if you want to answer, please do it now. Okay, stop it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the results is unlike last time I could see the results, I can't see them this time. So I just wondering, could you quickly summarize the levels? Oh, there they are.
Yes.
I can see them now. Okay. I like this question because I always get a quite similar split in the results, and I have got certainly something very similar again this time. I would say we are evenly split between these three answers. Okay, so let's go and have a quick look at how I might answer this myself. Honestly, it really is evenly split. Okay, go back a slide. For me, now my opinion has changed over time. Okay, and in a way, this has been a trick question. It's been a trick question because I have myself implemented all three of these solutions, but my own thinking has had to change based on the threats and attacks and what's going on out there. Traditionally, we wanted to use the IT resources because that's what they're good at, and I certainly still encourage that. But the problem is, if we put the antivirus server out onto the enterprise, then I no longer have to hack the control system. I can hack the enterprise and I will attack it directly and through phishing type attacks. And unfortunately, that's what goes on. The plant DMZ, that was also being very common up to recently. And in fact, I've even seen that still being taught in some training courses. But again, the DMZ is a no man's land. It should be as fewer things in there as possible. And if we put really important sensitive servers in the DMZ, again, it's bypassed the boundaries. The place really for the antivirus is to be managed in the same level of zones or same type of zone as the systems that they manage. So for me, these days, I would always strongly advise item number 3 on here. Okay, very strongly advise it. If you've got one of the other two in your installation, don't worry, it's not particularly expensive or difficult to change. It just needs the server moving down into the control system. That's basically my advice from here. Okay, now then, just a pause for thought here. The same type of thinking needs to be applied to many other common things that we do in the network. So the types of questions I ask people are, if you've got domain accounts on the engineering workstation, would attaching that to a common domain increase or decrease overall risk? And notice I'm asking these as questions. And the reason I'm asking these as questions is because there's no direct answer to them. They need to go through a risk assessment process in order to determine what's correct for your installation. There's another example question here. Would implementing a network connection to the engineering station increase or decrease risk? It depends. It decreases risk in that I can now manage the cybersecurity. It increases risk that I've now got a direct network connection. We have to find the correct balance there, risk assessment. Again, no right or wrong answer. There's no common thing, but it needs to be risk assessed. Would implementing a firewall between the safety system and the control zone reduce risk? Possibly, but only in conjunction with other things. If there's a direct connection there already, a firewall probably will help if it can be designed safely into your system. If you've got no connection there at the moment, like this diagram on the screen now, possibly don't put a connection in because you introduced new risk. Should the engineering station share the same domain control as the control system? Well, if you do, you've shared a common mode failure with the main control system. Again, it needs to be risk assessed. So again, each of the above questions is linked to one or more common misconceptions, but none of the above have a right or wrong answer. It depends on your system. Again, as a highlight at the bottom, a risk assessment is required. This is the practical demonstration of what 61511 is saying. You need to risk assessment system. That's why they're not saying mandatory requirements. You shall do this, you shall do that, you shall do that. No, they're saying you shall risk assess your system and come up with the appropriate levels of solution for your system. Again, notice I'm talking about system. I'm not talking about components. I'm talking about the system as a whole. Okay, so from there, we then move on to 62443, which also has a life cycle in its own aspect as well. And we see essentially three parts to that life cycle. We see the assess phase, which is what we've been talking about, the risk assessment. We see a develop and implement phase, which is the treat, deal with the risks where you find them. And again, the 61511 does say something about that, making sure that you've taken and implemented suitable risk reduction across the system. And then the last piece, which I've mentioned earlier, maintain. Cybersecurity needs maintaining. Okay, there is an ongoing maintenance requirement to cybersecurity. It is not a project and then cease to fund or cease to resource, unfortunately. We've talked about the PHA earlier. I've got here an example. This example here has come from a bow tie to assess industrial cybersecurity, where you can see somebody has gone through various stages, documenting vulnerability assessment, partitioning the system, that's the same as the zoning, risk assessment, which is fed by the PHA, and then mitigation planning. Okay, so you can see here how the PHA feeds into the cybersecurity process and helps you to identify where the cybersecurity risks and how to prioritize them are. What I actually will add here is one, I'd say, one of the weaknesses I do see in cybersecurity risk assessment is where they are not linked to PHA. And so you see a cybersecurity risk assessment linked to say, someone's got an admin password as the consequence. No, that's not the consequence. The consequence is the bang on the plant or the environmental release. But that's where we need to be linked to. So that helps make sure that we focus everything into the final event, the proper risk, the system risk. And you can see that link here in this PHA. Okay, those of you in the UK will be familiar with the UK HSE guidance, health and safety guidance, OG86, compliance with which is a demonstration of a managed cybersecurity system. Those of you who are not in the UK, OG86 is essentially equivalent to the 62443 2.1 document, okay, which is a cybersecurity management system, and they interoperate quite cleanly. So if you're not in the UK, you're still wanting the guidance here, the same guidance or very similar guidance is available through 62443 directly as well. 6244321, the 2009 document. Very good document. I like that document a lot. Okay, and I'm not going to read down this list. It's available, I believe, on the website later, but here you've got a list of various different documents that you can also go to for further guidance. There's plenty of guidance out there. Okay, so summarize what we've said. I think this statement is quite important. If you think technology can solve your security problems, then you don't understand the problems and you don't understand the technology. It's not about the technology, it's about somebody with a malicious intent. Somebody is going to use your technology for a purpose for which is not intended. And if you try to use, just an example, if you try to use in technology to solve that problem, then you have introduced more technology that can also be used against you. And I think a classic example of that recently is the SolarWinds example, where the threat itself went in through the very software that was installed to find the threat. Classic example. So we can help. So we can support you with the following services. Through the GMI, we've got the 61511 lifecycle support and the various different activities that can be assisted with. And we've also got the 62443 lifecycle support and risk assessments, zone design, requirement specification that we talked about earlier. That's honestly, that's, you know, as simple as it sounds, that's really is where a lot of the benefit comes from. The industrial cybersecurity management, that's the OG86 or 6244321, and the assessments that go with it, and the supplier security management. Okay. And in conjunction with that, we've also, and this was mentioned earlier, we've got the virtual and classroom instructor-led training, which is the TUV Rhineland training. There's the functional safety training, which I think many of you will already be familiar with. There's also now a cybersecurity fundamentals course, which is a 3-day course. It's not 3.5 as it says that. Oh, actually, it is, sorry, it's 3.5 because there's an exam as well. And then there's the security risk assessment course, which is another 3.5-day course, including the exam, which builds on the fundamentals and takes you through to pass some of the concepts that we've seen in this webinar and looking at how to apply that in practice on your facility. Okay, passing those exams will give you the recognition of a certificate issued by TUV, and they can also be delivered as customized in-house training and seminars. Okay, so with that, we'll close and we'll hand over to the question and answer session. I'll just put the details back up there while I swap the slides.
Okay, we have 2 questions from the attendees. If you want to answer now, or maybe we wait.
Yes, we'll answer those questions first, because in case we need to get the slides out of this deck.
Okay, good.
Okay, so what's the questions?
I still see the old presentation, so maybe you have to switch.
No, I'll take the questions.
Okay, good.
If there's any questions now from the webinar, let's take those now in case I need to refer to a slide.
The first is, what are the documents that are required for cybersecurity risk assessment? Like in safety, we need the P&ID and ASOP for safety risk assessment. So what are the documents that are required? Okay.
That's covered in the cybersecurity risk assessment training course in a lot more detail. But the key thing there is we need to get access to hazard review, PHA type documents. We need access to architecture documents. We need access to policy statements if they exist, and you bring all of that together. We also need to access to your business rationale, because the tolerable risk needs to be defined through your business requirements. So there's a few steps that and bits and pieces that are brought together in terms of then defining the output from the risk assessment. We can also go to external resources for threat and vulnerabilities in terms of trying to look at the wider picture and applying it to the system. It's about 2 days worth of training course goes into just what I've highlighted there in 30 seconds. The process, though, if you're looking for that process, it's documented in the 6244332 standard.
The other is asking for if we have a cybersecurity book like of course, we have the functional safety seal manual book. I can answer that we don't have it. We don't have a cybersecurity book, not at the moment. So it's
problem with cybersecurity books is when you've written them, the cybersecurity guys also, the people who are hackers also read the books and then do the exact opposite. just a consequence of what goes on. The more that we have checklists, the more that we have defined ways of doing it, the easier it is for the hackers to then learn how to, if everybody's implemented this checklist and then they find a way to bypass it, everybody's system is open. And that's the problem with those types of approaches. So really, that's again why I'm highlighting that it does need to be personalized to your system. And actually the people who go through that process also, and this is my experience, tend to end up with much more reliable networks and operations as a result, because they've learned a lot about their systems in the process. So there is an advantage to doing it, one that the management will actually see and recognize. Okay.
Okay, no question, no more question. You can go.
Then let me jump over to the other presentation. I believe that's the one. Right, have I got the right screen up there?
Good. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so first question. 61511 states that security risk assessment shall be carried out to identify the the question is on the previous slide here. What role does 62443 have for the safety systems? Okay, what's the link between 62443 and safety systems? And this came up a couple of times in the questions for the webinar that you guys have submitted. So the statement there is 61511 states security risk assessment shall be carried out. There's the link. It's stated in 61511. Now then, to help us, we've got these three parts. 6244321 2009 describes how to set up a cybersecurity management system, a CSMS. You will hear that term, including these three parts. Again, you've seen this in the presentation: risk analysis, addressing risk with the CSMS, that's the implementation, design and implementation, and monitoring and improving the CSMS, that's the maintenance part. Okay, so that's really describing the life cycle, the management of your systems, or the management system. 6244332 2020, that's the document that came out late last year. It describes it's a security risk assessment process, SRA process. If you come on the TUV course, you will learn a lot of detail about that document and how to apply it in practice. And then the third document, which is important, is 6244333 from 2013, defines how to define the security requirements for system. That links back to the security levels that we mentioned in the presentation. A lot of people sort of pick out on the 2009 document and say, oh, it's 12 years old. And I say, yes, and it's doing incredibly well. It's really standing the test of time. There's a few areas around the edges where it needs to be updated, absolutely. But as a document, as a management system, as a process to manage your systems, it's actually very good. I find it very useful. And I think the 2020 risk assessment document will probably do the same. I'm a little bit more nervous about the 2013 document in security requirements of the system. I think that document might date quicker than the others, but the 2009 document, that's going to be central to your cybersecurity management, and the 2020 document is going to be central to providing the security risk assessment. Okay, next question. Can specialized cybersecurity software reduce cyber risk, or are human factors still the weakest link? And I include into this question questions like, can a firewall reduce the risk? Or can XYZ product reduce the risk? Can a firewall implemented on my safety system reduce the risk? I include all of those types of questions into this question as well. Okay, so these are the parts to consider. The first things first, security tools protect against specific known threats or threat vectors. And certainly the firewall we mentioned a minute ago is no different. A firewall blocks certain things and allows certain things. It's a filter. It doesn't magically determine whether the traffic is malicious or not. So no one particular security tool will protect against all threats to a system. That's really important. Right down to the data diodes cannot protect against all threats to a system, despite the marketing. They can't. We'll just use USB pens and bypass the diode. It's as easy as that. There's no guarantee that any specific combination of security tools can protect against all known threats. So if anybody is marketing tools in that way, please feel free from my behalf to give them a hard time, because that's poor marketing. Okay, so also need to consider, okay, specialist security software is making modifications to your systems by introducing that software. So adding, modifying, or removing software changes your exposed vulnerabilities and changes the surface area that can be attacked. And we've seen that. We have cases now where the security tools themselves are used to hack the systems. And adding specialized security software increases the complexity of systems being managed and will introduce new vulnerabilities. I've seen this in practice as well, where sites have implemented all the security tools, seen the reliability of the control system drop, and then called somebody like myself in to come and try and get the security reliability back up again. How do I do it? I switch off the security tools usually. Okay, the more complex a system is, the more likely that the system will have undetected security vulnerabilities. That's fairly obvious. And the more likely the system will experience operational or reliability issues. Again, we know that the more complex our control system, the more likely we are to have operational and reliability issues. Okay, and as it says on the last bullet point here, recent attacks have also targeted the security software, such as the SolarWinds case. Okay, so how do 62443 security levels relate to the 61511 standard? Again, we mentioned this in the presentation. There is no simple relationship between security level and SIL. Okay, risk assessment, good security zone selection, and careful design is required. Okay, so we have 4 SIL levels. Yes, absolutely. And SIL indicates the required, I've copied the words here so I get it correct, indicates the required degree of confidence that a system will meet its specified safety functions with respect to systematic failures. Okay. Other target measures are defined with regards to random failures and common cause failures. Okay. However, there are also 4 security levels. And it defines the level of protection required to reduce cyber risk. Note, there might be 4 levels, but they are not describing the same as the 4 levels in SIL. So please do not go trying to look for the connection between SIL and security level. You will be bitterly disappointed. Increasing the security level increases the complexity of systems, whereas we know that increasing the SIL level, we're probably not wanting to increase the complexity of systems. So just bear that in mind. So if we have a safety system that is going to require higher levels of protection, you need to be looking wider than your safety system, and you need to be looking at the zones and conduits. That's my hint in terms of how that is actually dealt with. Okay. And as says in the last bullet point there, the competent use of security zones will assist with identifying simple and effective countermeasures in order to provide those higher levels of protection to your safety system without necessarily having to modify the core components of your safety system. That's key to success there. Okay, move the complexity out of the safety system. Can cybersecurity risks be reduced without having to use an IPsec tunnel? Now, this is a genuine question that's come up, and I think I use it to highlight the reason to do training. The straight answer is yes. Okay, at a simple level. Why? Well, it's important to understand that any one particular cybersecurity countermeasure does. Okay, each type of countermeasure solves a different type of security issue. Again, we're looking at the onion model and layers of defense. And IPsec tunnels are designed to protect data during communication. So it stops people from reading or modifying that data while it's in transit between two systems. Okay. It does not guarantee the integrity of the data communications. It just says that what goes into the tunnel is what's going to come out of the tunnel at the other end. Okay. So we cannot guarantee that somebody hasn't already manipulated the data before it's gone into the tunnel. And it does not guarantee that the tunnel itself is implemented correctly, because you could use weak encryption methods that can be hacked by third parties. There's a lot of those still out there. So it does, as it says here, it does not reduce any other risk. If the risk is already in the system, the risk will be carried across the system as well by the IPsec tunnel. Okay, other countermeasures are usually also required. And the last point here, IPsec increases software complexity. It places higher demands on the CPU processing, and it increases energy consumption. So it's not necessarily always actually viable for certain types of components on our systems. Okay, so again, this is just demonstrating, although we hear some of these terms, IPsec, VPN, firewall, access control, two-factor authentication. You hear all of these terms flying around, particularly from the IT department. That does not say we have to implement them on our control systems. We need to implement the correct and most appropriate cybersecurity controls in the most appropriate places on our control system. Okay, it's very, very considered, detailed design process. Okay. So with that, I believe, shall I hand over to yourself? They've got a live webinar schedule, which is available on the website. You can see the upcoming webinars.
Yeah, we have a complete calendar that you can find on this link, but it's on trainings part. So all webinars are scheduled for next month also, this month, June, and also July. We have different topics beside the cybersecurity, also functional safety, also application for the products that we produce. And also we can find this webinar, which is it's recorded, and you can find the link soon available at always at this link, at this this part of the website, and also the other webinars are visible, so you can have a look, and you can share with your colleagues if maybe they didn't participate with it. Thank you.
Okay. So
yeah, we have the last poll, and it's we wanna have your, let's say, opinion on that. Don't worry, it's anonymous, so don't you can write whatever you like.
We like the excellent box, honestly, though.
We should put just excellent.
Excellent, yeah, and excellent, and that's it, yeah.
Also good. Also good is okay. Thank you. Don't worry. If you, of course, this is very important for us. If we maybe we have some, we need improving some parts, something you like. Of course, it's very important to have your opinion on that.
Absolutely.
Okay, you are so good. Well, everything is excellent and good so far. So you are a lucky man. Oh, you was very good. I hope.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. We can stop right now. thank you and stop it. And let's go maybe the next slide so you can remember our
course, yes.
name and our faces. And if you want to write us or write to William certain topic, we answer to almost your question. If we didn't, maybe we can just refresh us and we'll send later an email. Thank you, Will.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. And look forward to seeing some of you again next time.
Perfect. Thank you to all of you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye, Will.